And then is it like, can it see me? Is it a good?
It's a little dark, but I can see you.
Slide it back once. It could just be because of the background light. That's fine. So you can see me still?
Yeah.
That's good. Okay.
Like, it's a little dark, but like to see your face.
It's not just like right here or something.
Right. I can see your whole face. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Ryan was kind of telling me about. Okay, that's good enough. All right, so we'll get started. If you guys can't hear that, well, just let me know, or you can slide closer or whatever. So I'll talk first about format. There's not as much. I forgot when I was saying earlier that there's not as much matching on the test as there has been in the past. I changed it to be mostly multiple choice. So it's mostly multiple choice and it's in groups of 4. And I drew those questions probably about 3/4 from the quizzes and about 1/4 from the tests. But if you recall from the unit test, those had 5 options. So then I eliminated it down to 4, mostly because I'd be concerned about time. Because if you add an option, it's harder for people to finish in the allotted time. So there's only 10 matching questions. And the matching questions stem from chapter 15. That was, as I read through the test, I noticed for whatever reason I didn't include a lot from chapter 15. So I just threw kind of the matching section from a previous test and scrambled it. And then, so the bulk of the questions are multiple choice, like I said, with 4 options. So that would be questions number like 1 through 130, and then 131 through 160 is that identification section, and then it's matching, okay? So I want to start first with the identification section, and then I'll go back to the multiple choice section. So in the identification section, basically it says, for the next 30 or 40 questions, like A, I don't remember the order, but like A is exchange theory, B is SI theory, C is conflict, and D is functionalism. Match the quote, song lyric, statement, whatever, match the statement to whichever theory best matches the logic in that statement, okay? So let's do a couple of those without even looking. I'll just give you some examples, all right? So if you say, like there was a controversy this weekend about how Donald Trump in a meeting was alleged to have called nations like crap hole nations. You want to hear about that? Okay, so if you say, if the analysis of that quote says, the reason that individual people get so upset about that quote is because they interpret mentioning those nations that way as people being identified that way, okay? It's individuals interpret that statement for nations, by extension applying to the people also. Which quote or which theory would apply in that instance? SI. And what's kind of the key word that you look for there? Individuals and interpret. So if I was preparing for this section, I basically would, on the top of a piece of paper, I would write functionalism, conflict, SI exchange in like columns, you know, like it's an Excel spreadsheet, A, B, C, D. And then I would write like, I don't know if I'd say like Q words or keywords underneath to kind of look for when I'm reading the quote, right? Now, just because one of those keywords is in the quote doesn't 100% mean it applies to the theory, but it gives you a clue to kind of narrow it down, okay? So let me give you some examples, all right? First of all, I would start with the macro-micro thing, right? So which theories are macro?
Functionalism and conflict.
Functionalism and conflict, okay? Which theories are micro? SI and exchange. So what are some key words or cues that can tell you that it's more focused on the micro level? Individuals. You remember we talked about dyads and triads? Dyads a group of 2, triads a group of 3. Small groups. So if you're writing under your columns, small groups would apply to SI and which one? Exchange, right? Now, what are some other, again, for the micro level? So we got small groups, dyads, triads, individuals. Anything else? That, how about that person's, possessive, singular. So singular, any context where it's singular, that's a strong clue. Now let's flip the focus. Let's talk about macro. Okay, what are some key words that you can think of that are going to clue you in to say that it's probably macro? Society. Yeah, as a whole. Large groups. What is the sociological terms for big things in society that like work together? It starts with I. Institutions. Yep. So like literally in your sheet of paper as you prepare for that, have those columns and then put words that you think would fit, okay? All right, now let's narrow the focus a little bit, all right? Let's talk about functionalism. First, functionalism, is it macro or micro? Macro, okay? And the definition of functionalism in essence is to, what's the focus?
Explain how society works.
Yep, so how society works or functions, yep. So how big institutions work together in society to promote solidarity and stability. So let's narrow the focus again. Although this word structure could apply to both functionalism and conflict theory, you need more information, but that, if you see structure, it's more often than not functionalism, but you have to look at the context to figure out if it's conflict also. But when it's talking about structure, that's a macro perspective, right? Okay, so now, functionalism, let's look at some words that specifically would apply to functionalism then. What are some key words you would look at for functionalism? Function, purpose, systems, organized. Structures, like it's called, the longer word of functionalism is the structural functional approach, right? Okay, now what are some key words you would look for conflict theory?
Speaking of conflict theory, is it going to be as a whole, or is it going to be going down to gender?
There are a few multiple choice questions, and some of the quotes might reference like women or race or whatever, but conflict would still apply. There's no, it's not like it's like identify this quote, functional conflict, SI, exchange, race conflict, gender conflict. Okay. It's just the four overarching ones. Okay. So, what are some keywords for conflict theory? Class. Yep, social class. What did you say? Power, inequality, oppression. Anything that's a synonym for conflict, right? Struggle. Now, remember how I said inequality is a potential term? Let me give you an example of something that kind of counters that, right? If you recall, we talked about a theory, and I know there's a couple questions about this too on the test, the Davis-Moore thesis. The Davis-Moore thesis is a functionalist framework that basically explains why inequality exists in society. So what does the Davis-Moore thesis say about inequality? Yeah, inequality serves a purpose in society, and what is that purpose? Say it a little louder, I'm sorry.
For people constantly looking for jobs?
Yeah, it's not just to make people look for jobs, but you're correct in that jobs is the focus. So the Davis-Moore thesis basically says that in order for society to make sure that we have enough people that are essential in society for it to function, so like doctors, cops, whatever, okay? Society has to attach enough functional rewards to that position in order to draw talent into that pool, right? So part of the reason that physicians, that doctors make a lot more than whatever else is because we need smart, motivated, hardworking people to be doctors so that when an emergency happens, we don't die, right? Okay, we don't want like lazy, unorganized, not conscientious, unintelligent people to be doctors. Okay? So a quote that could be about the Davis-Moore thesis could say something like this: inequality exists in society to reward talent so that society works better, right? So you see how in that instance it's got the word inequality and it's got the works better part, which is functionalism. So in that context, it's saying that inequality is logical or is a good thing, right? So if the context of the quote says that the inequality makes sense or it's functional or whatever, then it's functionalist. But if it says the inequality is unfair, then it's conflict, right? So being able to distinguish those nuances, just because you see the word inequality doesn't 100% mean that it's conflict theory, okay?
So the test won't be related to things more, just be like functionalism.
Yeah, well, in the identification section, yeah. There might be a multiple choice question that relates to the Davis-Moore thesis, okay? All right, so at this point in time, I think I'll go through some of the logic in the multiple choice questions, and then when I get to the section, just so I can go front to back, then we'll do some of the quotes, okay? All right, so one of the earlier examples that I gave in the text, and the text gave right at the start of the year, talking about when researchers first discovered how social factors influence things in society, even at the individual level, was Durkheim's insight related to suicide rates, okay? So what did Durkheim find related to suicide rates? Yep, so social relationships, basically the greater social connections you have, the less likely you are to commit suicide, okay?
So that was people that weren't poor.
Yeah, so he broke it down specifically that the poor, actually it was the wealthy, excuse me, in his analysis, because the poor relied on others more.
The poor didn't.
Yeah, the poor didn't.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
rich had a higher.
Yeah, and the rich had a higher. Yeah. So basically, the more social connections you have, the less likely you are to commit suicide. And that trend has continued today, which is part of the reason why schools emphasize young people to be involved in some groups, right? And it's not just suicide rates, there's a lot of other pro-social factors that if you're in an activity, a structured activity, it doesn't matter if it's football or music or the play or whatever, okay? If you're in a structured activity, things go better for you, okay? Let's talk about some of the key people now, all right? What was Auguste Comte known for? Comte is the guy that developed the discipline of sociology or coined the term sociology. Okay, how about Karl Marx? What did he discover?
Wrote the Communist Manifesto.
Yep, and that, in the sociological sense, became the basis for what framework? The conflict theory. Yep. Okay. How about Max Weber? Weber talked about what he called the Protestant ethic, and then he also talked about bureaucracies quite a bit. The Protestant ethic, yeah. So Weber's idea with the Protestant ethic basically was that part of the reason that Europe was so successful was that there was this framework or this theological philosophy that basically said you should work hard and it's wrong if you don't, and that it's sinful if you don't work hard for your employers, and that was a very common framework in Protestantism. And then so if you have this belief that if you're devoutly religious and you think if I'm not working hard, I'm dishonoring my employer but also God, right? And you really believe that, you're going to be more likely to work hard than somebody that doesn't have that, vertical relationship also, or vertical framework. So he talked about that a lot. Okay, how about George Herbert Mead? What did George Herbert Mead develop? Mead was one of the main guys for SI theory. Okay, how about C. Wright Mills? C. Wright Mills is the looking glass self, which is a sub-theory of what discipline? SI, yep. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the distinction between manifest and latent functions. First of all, this is a piece that I think a lot of people got confused on in their presentations, because when they would talk about manifest or latent, they'd give examples of individuals, right? And why doesn't that work? For manifest and latent functions, why doesn't that work?
Because latent is something that's not planned.
No. Functions, why doesn't it work for individuals? Yeah, it's too micro-focused, okay? So when we're talking about manifest and latent functions, we might see individual behavior that relates to that, but you have to go up to look at the analysis, okay? So these are about bigger groups, bigger institutions. So let's say, for example, there's been a lot of conflict or discussion about the tax bill, right? That changed our tax structure quite a bit. One of the things that it did was that it dropped the corporate tax rate from, I want to say, like 33% to 14%. So for most businesses, the baseline tax that you pay got cut in half, right? And then you saw some stories about how like Walmart was giving everybody a raise and AT&T was giving everybody a raise, okay? So the intended consequence of changing the tax policy, in essence, at least the logic behind it by the Republicans, was that it's going to stimulate business, right? Which then will filter down to people. Okay, there's always some unintended consequences though. I think we're too close to really see what those unintended consequences are. So the intended consequences is that manifest or latent? Manifest. And then the latent is the unintended consequence, okay? I'm trying to think of another example. I was listening to a podcast yesterday and then this morning a little bit too. Billy Corgan, anybody know who that is? I would like buy you a coffee right now if you got it. Do you know who Billy Corgan is?
I recognize the name, but I don't know.
Billy Corgan is the lead singer of the Smashing Pumpkins. It's a band that was really popular in the 90s. So he was talking about how when like Napster was first a thing, it was this illegal file sharing that kind of broke the door down to do like digital music now, basically. Record companies and like big people that had a lot of say in the music business were like, this is horrible, we need to destroy it. And their resistance to it destroyed Napster and some of the legal file sharing, which was like part of their goal, right? But it also brought about competition that pushed for more of that digital music. So if you follow music at all, Chance the Rapper, like who's heard of Chance the Rapper? Like listen to his music a little bit? Okay. So he went like largely independent. So unintended consequence of that is labels being weakened in a broader sense because individuals decide to work outside the system, right? So rather than embracing Napster and trying to work within Napster's system and like come up with a business model initially, like eventually they're like, okay, we can't stop this, we better come up with something like this, right? But because they resisted it so much, an unintended consequence of that was that it led to a lot more of those systems, okay? So there's scenario questions about manifest and latent. Be able to understand that, okay? All right. Okay, I talked about that. Okay, let's talk about some criticisms of the different theories. What's a criticism of functionalism? What's a criticism of functionalism? What's the obvious criticism of functionalism and conflict theory? Let's start with that first. They're macro. They don't see the power in individual choices. Okay, so let's flip it. What's an obvious criticism of SI and exchange theory? They're micro. They don't see how societal forces influence individuals. Okay, now what's the conflict criticism of functionalism? What's up?
You don't take into account like up and down.
Yeah, the conflict criticism of functionalism is that functionalists just assume that everything's functional, right? a base premise of functionalism is that if something persists in society, it must be functional in some way. So they don't take into account that there are people or there are groups that exist in society that use their position to exploit others, right? Okay, what's the functionalist critique of conflict theory then? Yeah, not if there's like a white guy in the Senate and he proposes a law, he's not necessarily doing it, or if the Senate Republican leadership, to go broader, decides to adopt a party platform thing that opposes affirmative action, it's not necessarily because they're racist. It could be because they just think affirmative action isn't a good idea, right? So in essence, the functional critique of conflict theory is that it's too negative, okay? All right, so let's talk a little bit, let's shift to chapter 2 a little bit. Chapter 2 is on culture, right? So culture, broadly stated, discusses the ways of life of people that interact in a defined group, whereas society is within defined boundaries, right? What are the 5 elements of culture? Language, symbols, norms, values, and beliefs, okay? Let's talk about values and beliefs for a second. Let me give you a statement. I want you to tell me if the statement aligns more with a value or a belief, okay? It's important for people to be good citizens. Is that a value or a belief? That's a value. To be a good citizen, you must vote and be a member of a political party. That's a belief. Okay? So values are broader, beliefs are more specific. It's important to, it's important to put your best foot forward in terms of how you look, right? What's that? It's a value. When you go to a job interview, you should wear a suit and a tie. That's a belief, okay? So being able to identify that distinction will help you in those instances. Okay, give me some examples of some norms in society. Is that still recording? Can you just...
I don't... Yeah, it still says record on the, like the middle and the top.
Give me some examples of some norms in society.
Doesn't matter if it's a moray or a
No, this is the easiest question I'll ask. An example of a norm. What's a norm, first of all?
Standard of behavior.
It's a standard of behavior that's kind of like a rule, right? Sometimes it's implied, sometimes it's explicit. So to use the Mean Girls movie, when they're sitting down and they're like, and we wear pink on this day and you can't wear this and you can't wear this, is that explicit or implicit? Explicit, okay. And then to use Mean Girls again, she's like, I really need to lose 3 pounds. And then everybody just kind of sits there and she looks and looks and looks. And then after a little bit, she kind of glares at somebody and they're like, oh, no, you don't, right? Is that explicit or implicit? Implicit. Implicit, okay. What is the norm that she is mad because people aren't following the norm? Yeah, if somebody complains or like speaks negatively about themselves, you should reassure them, right? So let me give you an example, and I want you to tell me, is it a moray or a folkway? And then is it explicit or implicit? Just like the activity we did in the Mean Girls analysis. So we'll use the law, for example, all right? So we'll use like premeditated murder is a AA felony. I'm not exactly sure the wording of the law, but there is a law that basically says that, right? So what would that be? Explicit, moray, or folkway? Moray. Morays are a lot stronger, right? Okay. No shirt, no shoes, no service. You see that a lot of places.
That one I would say depends because some businesses have a sign.
Yeah, well, let's assume there's a sign in the business that says that. It's explicit. Is that moray or folkway? I would probably say Folkway, although you probably need more context, right? So
See what-
it's summer and you're downtown and there's a, you know how they tried to do the water slide thing? It was in the paper. They have this giant water slide thing where they bring it into a town and it's like half a mile long or something, and then you can pay and you get to slide down it. It sounds pretty cool, right? So they're like, we're gonna go to this place and this place and this place. And some people are like, yeah, Fargo would like that, not knowing the geography of Fargo, that, you know, there's not really a lot of hills here to make that work, right? So then they had to cancel it because they couldn't figure out a route that would work to do it, okay? So they did it in Bismarck, right? So if that's going on, and like, even though they have that explicit thing there, you know, that's a Folkway for sure, okay? If you're in like the Middle East, where, you know, women are supposed to wear a burqa, you know, there's a very, very strict standard, and then you violate that, it's probably more of a moray, okay? So context matters for a lot of those things. So you guys think you understand that distinction, or do I need to give more examples?
I understand.
Understand it? Okay. Okay, let's talk about some of the sub-theories, like dramaturgy, Sapir-Whorf thesis, the Thomas theorem, okay? Which one would fit with the Shakespeare quote that says, the world is a stage and we're actors on that stage? Dramaturgy, exactly. So you have your costume, which would be the clothes you wear, your script, which is what you're supposed to say. So understanding all that stuff to dramaturgists is the key to understanding how people act in a situation. What's the focus of the Thomas theorem? What's perceived as real is real in its consequences. Yep. So a lot of humor plays off that. I know Meet the Parents and Meet the Fockers, like those movies definitely play off that, right? Where somebody comes into a situation and they don't see like the poor guy that's trying to do the right thing, but then they walk in and he's like holding a cat and it looks like he's killing the cat or something, right? I can't remember which movie that is, but it doesn't matter that he in reality was trying to help. What matters is that it appeared really, really bad, okay? And then how about the Sapir-Whorf thesis? The Sapir-Whorf thesis basically holds that language and thought and values are all connected. So one part of the Sapir-Whorf thesis would say that, like, I can understand wrestling more than all of you because I know the language involved with it, or Alyssa understands hockey more than all of us because she knows the language associated with it, right? But in addition to that, it's not just that you understand it more, it's that you value it more. So to use kind of a deviant example, and don't say names, right? But there are some people that are really into marijuana, right? So they know like every slang term for marijuana and whatever, right? So they can think more deeply about it. Not all the time because they're into marijuana, but they can think more deeply about it. But in addition to that, they also care about it more because they know all the terms for it, right? Okay, what's a very, very strong moray that is so strong that it's bad to even talk about it? Taboo, yep. An example of a taboo is the incest taboo. And incest is the norm that says you don't fool around with people that are closely related to you by blood. Okay, what's the difference between material and non-material culture?
Material is tangible.
Yeah, material is tangible, physical, like inventions are examples of that, whereas non-material is not. So if you invent something like a phone, that shapes non-material culture, right? There's like norms and values about how you should act that emerge around that piece.
Could you define incest taboo one more time?
Yeah, the incest taboo is strong norms that say you shouldn't even discuss hooking up with like your brother or sister.
Okay.
Okay.
What's an example of the non-material culture?
Well, so an example of that would be the slang that people use on phones, for example. So, LOL, like if I would have said that when I was in high school, somebody did something and I go LOL, they would have looked at me like, what are you talking about, right? But that language is non-material, emerged because of that technology. Okay? All right, let me give you some examples of some scenarios to talk about, and then I'm going to run to the restroom and double check and make sure that the cell phone, or not cell phone, video is working, okay? So I want you to talk about the difference between culture shock, counterculture, and cultural lag, okay? Counterculture, culture shock, and cultural lag. Give some examples, all right? Why don't you hit stop on the video, okay? Just close it and it'll stop, okay?